Chat, can you hear me? I'm calling from rock bottom. The reception down here is surprisingly good. So good that I've been able to watch a multitude of BLs over the course of this year. I've been out here dodging reality like that bus was dodging SpongeBob. It's not avoidance, okay? It's prioritization. Hi, it's Kayla, by the way, and today I want to talk about disappointment. Have you ever found yourself dwelling on the wasted potential of a show, wondering what could have been, and visualizing a better version? If so, you're in the right place. In this video, I'm going to be discussing 3 BLs from this year that I just can't stop thinking about, and not in a good way. All 3 have left me with a disappointment so heavy that I've sunk into the bottom of the seafloor. Much like plaque psoriasis, I've ranked these shows on a scale from moderate to severe, with the first being the least disappointing, but still very disappointing, and the last being so disappointing that it's offensive. This has a lot to do with personal preference, so don't take me too seriously, unless I'm addressing a serious topic. Speaking of which, I need to give a content warning for discussions about violence and sexual assault. Please be mindful and proceed with caution. The first series on my scale is Me Mind Y's Parallel Universe BL, The Boy Next World. Now, I've been a harsh critic of Mame's writing since 2018. She doesn't have the best track record when it comes to depicting trauma and specifically sexual assault. So I don't know why I've continued to give her so many chances over the years. To be honest, I think it's because she has an eye for pairing actors together. I'll give her that. But not even Boss and Noel's explosive chemistry could distract me from how disjointed and anticlimactic this series turned out to be. The thing is, I really enjoyed the first half of the series. The Boy Next World involves 2 tropes that I do not play about: soulmates and alternate dimensions. So naturally, I was drawn to the concept. I was so intrigued by the mystery surrounding Sir's character. Is he from a parallel world where he and Pooh are a loving couple? Or is he simply a stalker who has been following Pooh since they were in high school? The possibility of either scenario being true kept me engaged in the story. I wanted to know. Would they play the soulmates card, or would the series take a sharp left turn into something more dark and questionable? Part of me wanted the latter because it would have made Sir quite interesting and morally gray. Those traits still apply to him, but not to the same extent. Anyway, to make a long story short, I was extremely disappointed by the fact that they decided to make both scenarios a reality. To me, it felt like they were muddying the waters by doing too much. If Sir and Pooh are meant to be together in every universe, then fine, go with that. If Sir is Pooh's stalker, then fine, go with that. But Sir being a stalker who can travel between universes is so goofy. By the time I finished The Boy Next World, I realized that I had just watched a series that was full of red herrings. The substance that I thought was there never existed. The world building was all over the place. Why could that one guy randomly read minds? Why was the fiancé dressed like it was 2013? I had so many questions. Not to mention, I watched the finale and didn't even know it was the finale. That's how anticlimactic it was. And then I watched the special episode, and it just pissed me off even more because it was set in the parallel universe where Pooh is the stalker. When you try to pursue too many plot lines at once, they're all going to suffer in the writing department. They needed to stop jumping from plot line to plot line and just focus on the initial story they set out to tell. On a lighter note, I don't feel like I completely wasted my time on this series because the parts that I liked, I really liked. Boss and Noel should teach a workshop on chemistry. They brought the exact energy they needed for the roles of Sir and Pooh. Familial trauma is another plot point that I always find entertaining. Sir was your typical rich kid with an overbearing mother and an arranged marriage, but I kind of lived for how stereotypical and melodramatic it was. It brought me back to the classic K-drama days. Another aspect of this series I really enjoyed was Pooh's friend group. I love how he had these 2 beautiful women defending him 24/7. They were not for the bullshit, and neither am I. The only reason I stuck with this next series is because I fell in love with one of the characters. Unfortunately, even my hyperfixation on Fidel couldn't cancel out the disappointment I felt upon finishing The Heart Killers. I was hyped up when this series first started airing. The TikTok edits hated to see me coming. I was lurking in those hashtags like a hungry crocodile in the Everglades. For a minute there, I was completely hooked. Then all of a sudden, I fell off hard. I think it's because I realized that it wasn't the story I liked, but the characters and the actors who were playing them. In fact, the characters, Bison, Fidel, Style, and Cant, were my favorite part of the series. It was easy to sympathize with them because they all had very unique and likable personalities. Style's Good Morning Krupp will go down in history. If you're looking for some fun, campy characters, then look no further. So then what's the issue? Well, let me tell you. I've learned to manage my expectations when it comes to GMMTV. Sometimes they'll market a series as a mature, edgy drama, then it'll turn out to be a romantic comedy. A previous series that fell into this category was Dangerous Romance. Maybe it's the sponsors urging them to keep their content PG, maybe it's them trying to appeal to a broader audience, but The Heart Killers really felt like a Disney-fied story about secret agent brothers. I didn't expect it to be so unserious, especially because the trailer was so risque and action-packed. If it was meant to be offbeat and benign, then it should have been marketed as such. Because when I hear the word hitmen, I expect the assassination element of the plot to hold a lot of weight. And it didn't really hold any weight at all. There was no long-term consequence for anything that happened. It felt like they were holding back in terms of what they were willing to show. And that's where the Disneyfication comes in. Think of KinPorsche or Pit Babe, both shows that didn't shy away from depicting the violence and death that accompanies the criminal underground. I don't think we're ever going to get something that ambitious from GMMTV, and that's totally fine. I just wish they would stop promoting one thing, then delivering another thing entirely. Things I liked about this series? Fidel and Style, Cow Tongue's OST, that's about it. Nothing was bad per se, just incredibly boring, and I admit that some of that might boil down to my standards being too high from the start. I'm also realizing that I'm very character driven. I need a character that I can relate to, or I just won't get immersed in the story. Luckily, these characters being so well written is the one thing this series excelled at. I have no preamble for this last one. Top Form was the most disappointing series I've watched in a long time. I came out of this one feeling genuine rage because the wasted potential was so insane. It was a travesty. Some of my favorite BLs are set in the entertainment industry. There's just so much potential for messiness and deception in that type of environment. I live for it, and I was living for Top Form up until the events of episode 6. My first disappointment has to do with Johnny's redemption arc. Why did they feel the need to redeem the perpetrator of a sexual crime? It makes no fucking sense, especially because Boom did such an exceptional job at portraying the emotional aftermath of Akin's assault. His anguish, his confusion, his self-blame. It was palpable. Johnny's actions traumatized him so profoundly that he couldn't even say what happened to him out loud. And then, 2 episodes later, they're playing goofy sound effects and a jaunty little tune every time Johnny walks onto the screen. Everyone is cracking jokes, including Akin, who is suddenly cordial with the person who touched him inappropriately while he was unconscious. Humanizing a perpetrator by glossing over their actions is the utmost disappointing stunt you could pull because it minimizes the severity of sexual assault. It's textbook romanticization. This kind of shit is so outdated, it's giving 90s yaoi manga. That's the moment when I knew things were about to go downhill. Don't even get me started on the fact that they were setting up Naru as Johnny's love interest. First off, you cannot convince me that Naru wasn't deliberately styled to look like a child. Anytime he interacted with Johnny, I was like,
not eating it.
Why? You a vegetarian?
No, I'm not a vegetarian.
To make matters worse, they really leaned into the narrative that Naru was innocent and naive in comparison to Johnny, who was infamous for taking advantage of others. Genuinely, what the hell were they trying to do there? Another major disappointment I had with this series was the lack of backstory and character development we get for Jin. The story opens from his perspective as a rookie actor trying to make a name for himself in the industry. Early on, we see some of the quirks and weaknesses that exemplify who he is, but once he meets Akin, his characterization really starts to fall off. His entire personality revolves around being infatuated with Akin, and at first, that infatuation is what draws you into their relationship. Jin is such a golden retriever when it comes to Akin, wanting to be around him all the time, and using any excuse in the book to do so. Acting isn't even something he is particularly passionate about. He just wants to be equals with Akin. It worked for a while, but once the story switched to Akin's perspective, it started to feel like Jin was simply a foil for Akin's character. It was like he existed simply to highlight Akin's struggles. The reason I found this disappointing is because if you really think about it, we don't know much about Jin's life. On several occasions, his manager says he went through a lot of hardships, but those hardships are never depicted nor elaborated on. So what's his backstory? And when we do see him go through hardships regarding his company, why is it Akin that suffers the consequences of that? The series quickly devolved into an Akin trauma marathon, and as a result, Jin became impossible to connect with. There's a clear discrepancy between the writing of their characters, and I was just so bothered by it. There were some other narrative choices that I didn't really understand, and I felt like they were just throwing them in there as a way to harken back to the anime. For example, there's that weirdly sexual moment where Jade tackles Akin and puts his hand up his shirt to try to warn him that he shouldn't meet that photographer. It didn't make sense for him to do that to Akin when he knows better than anyone what he's gone through. It was all for shock value. Out of all the shows I've mentioned, Top Form was the one I got the most invested in. I loved the artistic choices, the cinematography, the score, the premise of the story, and of course, Smart and Boom's exceptional acting. Their chemistry was off the charts, and poor Boom, having to cry nearly every single episode, his portrayal of Akin was very impactful. So now, do you get why I was so disappointed? The series had everything going for it. I feel betrayed by how quickly things deteriorated. On a separate note, it's a shame that Smart is currently facing similar issues as his character. I'm wishing him the best. These companies ain't shit. Is this a controversial video? I didn't think it was, but now I'm second guessing myself. Like I said in the beginning, most of my criticisms are based on personal preference and interpretation of the shows. Every person consumes media from their own point of view. But I will say, the one issue I have never and will never back down on is the romanticization of sexual violence. That to me is so bold-faced that it's not even up for interpretation. Anyway, thank you to the moon and back for watching. And thank you guys for always being patient with my uploads. I actually just quit my job, so I might have more time to create content now. I'm not sure, but we'll see. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Bye!